Jeff, you're it.
All right, thanks, Chris. Welcome, everyone, to Your Bytes, Your Rights, a weekly live discussion and podcast about data ownership, digital rights, and your privacy. In session 21, we explore the impact of the Dobbs ruling by SCOTUS on privacy rights. What does it mean for all of us? I'm Jeff Jokish, founder of Privacy Plan and a vocal data privacy researcher. I'm here with my co-host, Christian Kmeyer, managing partner at Susny Capital, a VC fund that focuses on blockchain tech. Chris has a big interest in privacy, identity, the future of money. How are you today, Chris?
Hey, you managed to say my name right. It only took 20 episodes. Very good.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Well, I'm a technologist at heart, intermittently was a lawyer, and so have a newfound interest now in constitutional law and learning more about that. Obviously, my law background is from Germany, specifically Europe in general. Had a few things to do with regulation over there, but then overall I'll spend most of my days in venture capital trying to find solutions to actually build the web for the first time. And people today think that they're on the web, they're usually not. And when they think they're anonymous, they're usually not. So that's the effort that we are trying to foster here by bridging the knowledge across different disciplines. And that's the purpose of our weekly calls and meetups here.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, I don't know if you know it, but there are automatic license plate readers being installed all over the country. There are a lot of big players actually in that market, but there's a new one that's particularly scary to me. A company called Flock Safety has cameras now in 1,400 cities across the US and can photograph more than 1 billion vehicles every month. They're actually working with homeowners associations, police departments too, and they've even got license plate readers in police cruisers. What does this have to do with the Dobbs decision? We're going to get to that shortly. Certainly the Dobbs decision is crucial for women, as we're going to discuss, but this decision hits at the heart of what we thought was a constitutional right to privacy for every one of us. If a right to privacy is going to be denied by the courts, where and how far will state legislators go? Can we have a right to privacy without a federal privacy law? Is that even enough now? Do we require a full constitutional amendment to fix this potential issue? We have a heck of a panel for this event. One of them is limited on time, Colin. So let's introduce them all. We've got Heidi Sass with us today. She's going to talk about the Constitution and privacy. We've got Colin Waukee, state legislator, to talk about the state legislator mindset. We've got Violet Sullivan to talk about InfoSec and privacy. And Debbie Reynolds is going to do a cameo for us on technological risk. So I'm going to let them give a little bit of an intro as they begin speaking with us to give you a little bit more about their background. So let's actually start with Colin because he's limited on time. Colin, let's hear from you.
Well, first of all, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on today to talk about this extremely important issue, and I apologize that I have to leave early, and I'm going to go back and watch the rest of this because this is a really, really important issue. I'm a state legislator in the state of Oklahoma. I am a Democrat. There are only 17 of us out of 101 members of the Oklahoma House of Representatives, so we're a severe minority. 3 years ago, I fell in love with all things data privacy and actually ran opt-in data privacy legislation in Oklahoma that passed both 2 years ago by a vote of 85 to 11, as well as this year by a vote of 75 to 15. And I will tell you, when we're talking specifically about privacy rights, what that looks like in Oklahoma, the reason why I knew we would have good odds of getting data privacy passed is because conservatives appreciate their privacy as much as anybody else does. This is one of those few areas where you can get bipartisan agreement. However, to your point, Jeff, all politics is local. And so one of the things that we had to do in Oklahoma to ensure that this would pass is all of my Republican colleagues had to say, this won't inhibit law enforcement's ability to catch the bad guys. And now with abortion legislation that's in place that criminalizes not just the abortion itself, but also people who assist in providing and procuring those abortions, you're going to see a lot more conservative Republicans go, well, wait a minute, does this data privacy bill allow law enforcement to still identify those individuals? And that's a severe concern because the entire point of privacy legislation is to prevent that type of identification. So it is a really extremely concerning issue from somebody who's sitting in a very red conservative state like Oklahoma, because they'll agree there's privacy. And I think that's the other side of it too. In talking with my conservative colleagues, it's not that they see abortion as a privacy issue. They see that as an issue between life and not life, right? And so that's, I think, where you're going to start seeing some dividing lines is how much of this has to do with the right to privacy versus having to deal with what they consider to be a life at inception. So I appreciate those are my short comments on that, but thank you.
Absolutely. And that is a really interesting distinction. I think when we think about, other police enforcement activities, like maybe catching a terrorist, right? That line might be different in different people's mind. The ability for law enforcement to get a warrant and go to a company and grab all of that data, maybe we're a little bit more forgiving. But even then, we know that law enforcement has a lot of capabilities to go grab that data now, even without a warrant. And I think that's one of the reasons we need stronger data privacy laws now. And I think some of our other panelists can maybe speak to that. But let's maybe dig a little bit more into the constitutional issues that we've got now. Do we have a constitutional right to privacy? Maybe Heidi could talk a little bit about that.
Thanks for having me on. My name is Heidi Sass. I'm a data privacy and technology attorney. I live in the Washington, D.C. area. These are my opinions, not legal advice. As far as privacy, I believed that we had an inalienable right of privacy that our founding fathers put forward, but forgot the word privacy, because they could not foresee the type of invasion of privacy that we're living in now. They just couldn't foresee that. Everybody wants to turn to the Warren and Brandeis, Harvard article about, the right of privacy. That's because two wealthy white men did not like their picture being taken, and they thought that it may improperly put them in a light that would reduce their power. And so we need some privacy. They got upset and wrote a paper about it, and then nobody else did anything about it, right? So then we move forward, as we get into some other issues, technology is usually what spurs these types of regulatory reactions, right? The Telephone Wiretapping Act. Oh no, you can't do that. You can't listen to my phone calls, so then you got Wiretapping Act. So then you move forward, you get to Griswold, and Griswold is really where they first addressed privacy head on. That was about a married couple going to a Planned Parenthood to get condoms. And they put the doctors in jail. So from a law that they had that was hundreds of years old, an all-male, all-white Supreme Court looked at it and said, this cannot be. There has to be some sort of right of privacy. That's where we got the penumbras and emanations from the Fourth Amendment, and they just tried to cobble together some of these other pieces from where they had a foundation for privacy in the law without using the word privacy. So they made one, right? And so that case was used as the foundation because it was from the Supreme Court, and that's our law, and it was used in the foundation for other cases that we consider to be our rights, like Lawrence, like Roe, like all of these other cases that protect the rights that we now consider to be part of our lives that are being clawed back. Well, currently as it stands, the Supreme Court has a super majority of conservatives. So this is why we freaked out when Ruth died, but it's worse than we thought now, and it's moving a lot faster. I did a study of Justice Thomas's, because he's Justice Cockblock right now for sure. Like, he's going after us at every angle. You can't have gay sex, you can't have unprotected sex, but he's just going after it all together. So I went through his decisions to find out what is he talking about when it comes to the foundations of privacy, and I was shocked because he had called out 20 and said in his decisions, I put a post about this on LinkedIn, he said in his decisions that all of these rights are based on legal fiction, and a dangerous one at that. And then he went under privileges and immunities and started to attack rights under privileges and immunities. So that is important because the privileges and immunities is what has your rights go from state to state with you, right? And so if we don't have the privileges and immunities to travel with us, then we are open to whatever law is being forced upon us wherever we go. So that's kind of a problem. He was reviewing this in terms of a gun case, and the gun owners want to have their rights everywhere they go, right? So Colin is absolutely right. We do have bipartisan support on this issue. We do need a constitutional right, because in reading what the court is saying about these cases that are based on a dangerous fiction called privacy, right? These cases are going to continue to be overturned as they bring them before the supermajority. They're going to keep clawing back our rights, our civil rights. They're going to keep going at it. Privacy is at the core of the cause, and they're going to keep doing it because they don't have a constitutional right of privacy. Some states do have a constitutional right of privacy. Those are most likely the states that also have a privacy law because they based it on their state constitution, which included privacy. None of those states are over on the East Coast where the country started, where the Constitution was formed. None of these states over here have a right of privacy. So we're going to need a federal right of privacy. The new ADPPA, that's a good start, but I don't think it will survive constitutional scrutiny by this conservative supermajority court, because they will say you don't have the foundation for this law based in what is deeply rooted in our traditions of privacy in our history, because we don't have privacy in the Constitution. So we need the 28th Amendment, and that's an arduous task, but we do have bipartisan support on this issue. We need the 28th Amendment to assure personal privacy rights. And we need the ADPPA to say how you're going to treat data in this way, and for the particulars, and all of the good things that we do want to have with the ADPPA. But foundationally, it's got to start with a very simple constitutional rights to personal privacy. Then we can build from there. I'm not going to be comfortable until we have one of those, just because I see where the court is going, and I also see where all of the reactionary religious people are going as well. Because we're smart people, we're trying to figure out what can we do to help people. They're smart people too, and they're trying to figure out how can we force our religion on the rest of these immoral people. And they're working as hard as we are. So that's kind of the race that we're in, is it's about religion at this point. And so we have a right of personal privacy. We're going to have other people's ideas of morals forced upon us because we don't have the right to push back. So that's where I'm at on it. Jeff, you got a question? You look puzzled.
No, I think I'm hearing you. So if we don't have a constitutional amendment, if we don't have a federal privacy law, where do you think this goes? If SCOTUS starts overturning more of these laws, if they overturn gay marriage, if they overturn interracial marriage, if they overturn contraception, maybe a question for Colin. You're in one of these states that has a large Republican majority. Where will these legislatures go if they have the ability to go there? Do you have any thoughts?
I do. I mean, I can tell you that, in Oklahoma, for example, I can guarantee you if there were a case that came up or legislation that came up in order to address, for example, gay marriage or something along those lines, I can see that being the next avenue of attack. They ran anti-abortion legislation for the 40 plus years, since Roe, in order to get to that point. So now I can see them starting to run that type of legislation in order to try and challenge the rights to LGBTQ marriage. And the reality is I think until we have structural change within our election system, because the biggest problem that we have is gerrymandering. And I don't mean that just in the legal sense where you're drawing districts that are blatantly, obviously wrong, but I'm saying that even for me, my district, we went through redistricting just now, my district improved and got better for a Democrat than historically. And all the Republican seats got better as well. That was not intentional, but that's the way it works, because once you've drawn a boundary safe, pretty much every time you redraw it, it's going to continue to be safe. And so once that happens, then the extremes take over. And if you're on the left, you got to run to the left. If you're on the right, you got to run and vote to the right, where somebody more extreme than you will beat you in a primary. So until we have open ranked choice voting in primaries, open primaries, or we redistrict by independent commissions, we're going to continue to have legislators who play to the base in order to ensure their reelection. And that includes popular topics to religious conservatives like gay marriage. So it is a severe concern because I can see them doing that exact thing, which is why the people actually have power and need to demand better of their legislators through something as far afield as redistricting.
Interesting. Chris, you have a question?
Well, I always have obviously the technology opinion on these things, and so the large problems that I see here is that we now, as a society, everybody is carrying their own surveillance devices with them, oftentimes not knowing that these are spying on you and track your every move, track your every search. So it's basically trivial for anybody at this point in time to buy this particular information and narrow down who in their mind is quote-unquote violating any type of law that is a law in a particular state, which coming from Europe and Germany specifically, it's both frightening and kind of awkward. On one side, I'm of two minds here. On one side, I appreciate the idea that I can move states and still I am in the same country and I can decide, well, I like the way that things are being done over there better, i.e. I could move from California to Florida and not pay state income tax, and that would probably pay for a house over there, and so that would be better in that respect. So you get kind of the opportunity to vote with your feet in some regards, but at the same point in time, then if you have these rights taken away or narrowed in some shape or form, and then that law to some extent follows you by virtue of you having a personal tracking device and having your search history and everything else available to people that want to mitigate your personal freedom in whatever shape or form, right? So not just talking about the specifics that we're talking about today, but in general, I think that is very, very, very problematic. And to me, as much as warrantless surveillance is concerned, I think we should extend the standard to private organizations, and everybody who is doing that needs to show some warrant or otherwise lawful legal cause in order to do that. So I think what the court and actually most regulators do not appreciate is that we are in a factually different world today than we were when these particular laws were invoked, right? So I have this discussion on a daily basis, right? Afterwards, I'm speaking on another panel is exactly on that. We're essentially having conversations between people who live in a different world, right? So they live in a world that no longer exists. Technology interfaces with the physical world, with the real world, right? Whereas these ideas do not. So rules do not, but technologies literally interface with laws, and that's a very important distinctions to be made always in language.
And if I can just touch on that real quick just before I run, because I think you bring up a good point, especially in conjunction with something that Heidi said, which is where there's a will, there's a way. I mean, you think about the Online Movie Video Act that was passed in '89 or whatever as a result of Van Bork, who was being nominated for the Supreme Court, his rental list got leaked, right? And all of a sudden Congress acted. And that law is still applying today. I mean, if you're Vimeo, you've got to apply with that law, right? But that's just it, is I think that once somebody's ox gets bored that cares enough, like John Oliver did recently by having a bunch of senators go to a website, and he collected their information and said, pass a law or I'm going to release this. Until their ox gets bored, I don't think you're going to see action. But to your point, everybody's ox is getting bored. And so I hope that that's an impetus to get something moving forward, just like they did 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I'm also of the mind whenever you criminalize a behavior, regardless of the specifics, so then the people that don't respect the law will still obviously perform these behaviors, right? So you're not doing anything about the underlying root cause. The typical example is if I make gun ownership illegal, that doesn't get rid of guns at all. It just makes it so that people that don't respect these laws have guns, and the people that respect the laws don't have guns. And that seems to be a bad idea, right? In general speaking, again, like so. And all regulation, that's the other part to that, is by definition inflationary, right? Because now you got to enforce that. Now you got people that need to control that. And specifically, if you defer these ideas and these enforcement mechanisms to private entities, that is very troublesome, right? Very troublesome.
I have some good news here. I read the prosecutors around the country in a lot of these affected states got together, and the prosecutors themselves issued a letter and said, we have limited resources. We cannot focus our resources on chasing these cases, so we're not going to do it. And so legislatures are looking at how can we remove the prosecutors if they're failing to prosecute. How can we find someone else to prosecute? I think that's the scariest thing I've seen right there, is to remove something from the duty of the prosecutors, because they're the ones in the best position to decide what to chase, and to tell them that they have to chase these people when they have other serious interests that they need to follow through on. I think that's a scary thing to look at right there in the States.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And I hate data brokers, so the sooner we get a law on data brokers, the sooner we're gonna have more control over this and we'll have fewer problems. But first, we gotta get some foundational rights, so.
Well, let's talk about those technological risks, right? If we didn't have data brokers and we didn't have all these devices in our pockets that are tracking us, we wouldn't have nearly as much of a problem. So let's hear from Violet and Debbie about that technological risk and the data security risks that we have. How are these states and these state governments potentially going to track us, monitor our location, keep us from crossing borders? They can do that potentially with license plate readers, with location tracking, tracking financial transactions. What are all the ways that they can track us?
I don't think I can list all of this, but as you said, my name is Violet Sullivan, and I'm a cybersecurity and data privacy attorney, but I'm on the technical side. So when Chris was talking about the technical issues and kind of bringing it back out of just privacy and constitutional issues, I think it's really interesting to also think about what else is against the privacy nerds in all of us. Like what's against it is the digital commerce is now king. Like digital commerce and transfer of data and cross-border transfers, that's what's making it harder to enact a privacy law, because people want an ease of information flow, and we're over here basically causing problems to that. And where I think the best example is actually the touchiest example that we're here talking about today. Healthcare feels like they're always ahead of the curve when it comes to trying to protect the data, because they know diagnostic, treatment, mental health issues, everything that they've worked with, even past anything that we're talking about right now, has always been a sensitive issue that they've been subpoenaed for. They've gone through the court order process. From my healthcare friends and my time working with healthcare privacy, I see that they're the ones that have been able to bring this back out of the emotional issue that it is right now, and kind of bring it down to the level of the privacy of the data that you have, and combating that against the kind of the technical struggle, which is not technical, the corporate struggle, which is we want all of the data to do international commerce back and forth, and we want to have an ease of transfer of information. What I've seen really creative recently was New York, with there's like the 50 states have this agreement that they will, I can't remember the wording of it, but the 50 states have the agreement that data transfer back and forth will not be inhibited, but New York is carving out, and other states are following, I think Connecticut and a couple of other, the safe harbor provision to say, unless it is we're not going to transfer data if it's going to impact this anti-abortion criminality issue. They're carving that out, and I thought that was really creative, and specifically in the healthcare space, they've carved this out, kind of this healthcare data that is being used against citizens of their state, and they're saying we want to protect the citizens and privacy of our states. And to Heidi's point, it's usually the ones that have privacy interests that have kind of been ahead of the privacy curve. But when you ask me that question, going back to the original question you asked me on what data can you have on anyone, what can you imagine? I don't think it's, I don't know if it's a useful practice to list it out, but when I'm on the response side mostly, we do some risk mitigation on the front end, but when I see the hackers come in, and the threat actors come in from all different places, whether it's local, someone in the basement of their mom's house, or someone across the pond, this is an issue that they're starting to use data to also exploit. So we see the double extortion come in when it comes to a ransomware attack, which is usually, and 5 years ago, the focus of ransomware was just to lock you out. It wasn't to do the big data breach, and they got really smart. I'll tell you on the threat actor side, where the cybersecurity issue isn't where it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, because it used to be all about the big data breaches, but they realize they're very smart. Like the bad guys on my side realize we can get a lot more money because you value your data more than I do. So instead of wasting all that time of breaking in, taking the data, stealing it, and putting it on the black market, we can just hold you for ransom, lock you out of your own computer, your own system, and then just say, pay us a bunch of money. And then they got even smarter a couple of years ago and added on data exfiltration and extortion, and double extortion is kind of what it's referred to in our world of, yes, we're locking you out, you can't get in. So there's one, business continuity issue. And then two, but we're going to leak all your data, which they're probably going to have it anyway. There's not really trust that they're not going to leak it, but that is an open concern and question that a lot of lawyers have. So I will say the question of what can they get, what we're seeing on the bad guy side is everything. Everything the companies have on you, everything the data brokers have on you, anyone that they breach and take, they're taking that data. And what's really interesting is the employee data seems to be a lot more sensitive, and they're getting into employee mailboxes. So I actually worked on a recent case like December, where the attacker was mad that they weren't getting paid. And they emailed 4,000 emails a day to every single employee. I don't even know what I would do with that, right? Like, what do you do with that? That is the kind of data, power that you can have, not the 4,000 emails a day, but the fact that they can get their hands on anything that might not be encrypted. That's what we want to think about even from the legal side. If they can get that illegally, so go back to your legal illegal point, if the bad guys can get that stuff illegally, then we also should be concerned about that information, employee information, the personal information that you have through tracking, everything that's listed in GDPR, CCPA. All of that can be accessible. I mean, I can figure out a way to get all of that information. I think it's just about what kind of barriers we can put in place that will not disrupt the interstate commerce issue that all the corporations are going to be rallying against.
Yeah. A problem popped up that I hadn't even considered. So I guess these guys could actually get into abortion providers and hospitals and companies.
Yeah. And have already. They've already done that. So so that's the other issue, is there's that leaked data out there. So if someone finds that leaked data and then uses it in their investigation, we have no way of knowing where they're going to get this data from and how they're going to obtain it. But I would also see, I've also seen, I don't know if you've seen this, certain hackers that are on the pro-choice side are hacking into websites for the different states that have done this, and they've been putting nasty messages up on these different platforms and portals and all that stuff. So they're hacking on both sides, but mostly they're probably hacking against the pro-life states.
Interesting. Debbie, let's hear from you. What's the tech risk here in your view? You're muted, Debbie. I think you're still muted. There you go. Still muted somehow.
You hear me now?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, all right, sorry, double muted. I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but the risk is grave. The risk is great. So much of our digital exhaust is everywhere, and a lot of things about us, especially as it relates to health, if it isn't in a patient-provider situation that doesn't have the same protections. And a lot of the laws that are written there about data that you gave to someone, and a lot of the privacy laws are trying to say, well, you as a, if you want to transfer that data to a third party, then you have to do X, Y, and Z. But the problem is that we have this whole undercurrent of data being collected that you didn't give to anybody, but they've sort of figured it out. So they figure out from the other breadcrumbs that you left across the web, who's pregnant, who's, going to certain locations, what things do people eat, like what people are they, associating with. So I think that this kind of massive data collection, in my view, is creating a situation that's more like a fishing expedition. It's like, okay, let's see what data is out there, and then let's, figure out what we can do with it, as opposed to having it be something that's only limited to certain uses. So, and we fall into this for good or for ill. I think Chris had mentioned, we have surveillance, right? So we have things that benefit us, like our phones that can do surveillance. We have other things like smart speakers. Just walking down the street, the thing with the license plate reader. I think, all those bits and pieces and crumbs, someone somewhere wants to know that. They want to know that you walk down the street and get a cup of coffee every Tuesday, you walk 20 feet or something like that, or, your Fitbit and what your heart rate is and things like that. So I think the issue is problematic when people don't understand that. So I think this role decision, in my view, is helping people have more clarity on what is private and what isn't. Because I don't think people have a lot of clarity there. Like, we assume that we have more rights than we actually do have, and then so now that we know that that's not the truth, I think we can try to make different choices about how we want to protect ourselves. Understanding, something like, how am I gonna get information? Like, am I gonna search for it on, certain browsers? Am I gonna use certain phones? Am I going to change my behavior about where I go and who I talk to? It's definitely gonna have a chilling effect, I think. But I think, my concern here, I have a lot of concerns, obviously, but my concern here is that when we're talking about these types of issues in the US, these threads run through commerce, so it's not really a human issue. I've even heard Brent Kavanaugh say recently that, whatever this ruling is really not about abortion, right? So it's about something else. So that something else really is for commerce. And so looking at this issue through the lens of commerce takes the human part out of it, and that's the part that we really need. So being able to, I agree with Heidi completely. We need definitely a constitutional amendment. There's no substitute, in my view, for legislation or an amendment in that way. But I think what we're lacking here is kind of a fundamental privacy approach that is human as opposed to consumer, because we know that this is a capitalist country. Consumer commerce is king, but that doesn't really fill the gaps that we see here. And we're seeing stuff like, companies being served with things like reverse keyword searching, where it's more almost like a fishing expedition in a way, with people, as opposed to, probable cause, reasonable doubt, unreasonable search and seizure. Those concepts are being turned on their head because the technology has so many more capabilities than we had in the past.
Yeah, we talked earlier about a prosecutor or law enforcement getting a subpoena, right, and going to a tech company, a telecom provider, some third party, and getting information because they want to prosecute somebody. That's scary enough, in my opinion. And there's lots of ways that they might do that. including using something like a keyword search or geofencing, which are a little bit suspect. But it seemed to me that there's so much data out there, right? And with all of these different data brokers and all the ways to connect the dots with this massive amount of data that's available, right? That they don't even have to do that in most cases. They can just buy the data. They can connect those dots themselves. That they don't have to go get a warrant. That they can figure out from from public sources or purchased data everything that they probably need to know if they're smart enough.
Wouldn't you be able to throw that stuff out though? I mean, like, I'm just trying to think about the other side of it, like what I would do, what kind of fight I would put. That's why I'm wondering, Heidi.
It is not fruit of the poison tree. It is, it's blatant. It's on its face. It should not be allowed in. However, the government did not collect that data. They went and bought that data that was freely available in the marketplace, and that is the loophole. So that's the problem. Yeah, well, companies have also said, we don't really want to make you wait for this information because you've got this super bad guy that we believe is a super bad guy, so we'll just give it to you now. We trust that you'll bring us the warrant later. So now we've got big tech companies talking about who they think is the big bad guy to give information out on. I mean, it's a disgrace to justice is what this is. So if anything, I hope this is opening people's eyes to realize that privacy does affect us all, and this is how, because it's in every single part of our life. I want to talk for just a quick second about a company called Early Warning, all right? JP Morgan, Chase, Truist, and all of the big banks got together to compete with Venmo and online banking. So they built a company and a tool called Zelle, but the company that is running Zelle in the background is called Early Warning. Early Warning is just an LLC, but they all fund it, and they've got 14 different patents. Most of those patents are used for MFA. So whenever you go to a website and go, I forgot my website or I forgot my password, send me a link. It sends you a link. That is run by a back office company who is sending that over to use your identifier to do the authentication to get you back into whatever app or whatever you're doing. So, but that's the company that's doing it. While they're doing it, they're also looking at everything else you're doing. And it says on their website, don't use this for FCRA reasons, but it's funded by banks. So, I mean, you kidding me with that? But they're the ones that are creating some of the most dangerous tools out there, but they're being couched in terms of security for the business. And that's pretty invasive, and people aren't looking at that. Nobody even knows about this company. They're huge, and they are cornering the market on how you chase and identify people with digital markers. So I think when we do go after privacy rights, we do need to, have the language in there so that it can expand with innovation to continue to protect our privacy rights as they keep, moving the goalpost further down the road.
So on that whole fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine, for most people who haven't heard that, so if you use in criminal law evidence that was derived from an illegal search, arrest, or interrogation, it's inadmissible in court. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong there, Heidi, that in the past, whenever an agency used this type of information that they got based on a court order from some private company, they would usually make the argument that the individual provided this data freely, and so that basically was fair use in some shape or form. And I'm using the wrong legal terms here, but I think you know what I mean. Have you ever seen this? Yeah. Have you ever seen this being used successfully? So this doctrine in a court case.
It's being used all the time. It's being used all the time. Yeah.
In the context.
Trying to fight the evidence on that, and it keeps being overruled because that's what the court says. Exactly what you said. They gave it freely to a third party, and they are free. The government's free to go and buy these things. And that is why tech companies, the drone companies especially, are courting law enforcement hard and heavy. They give them free drones. They throw parties. They do all kinds of public events and have the cops show up and show the cops using their drones so that they can sell more of these in their law enforcement business. So they're having the cops do their sales for them. And these are the surveillance companies. So, I mean, it's
not just drones.
All the way around. Yeah,
it's all the different surveillance technology companies do that.
But I don't think cops should do
the
that.
LPR company I was talking about, right? They do the same thing.
I don't think the police officers should be spending their time that way. I'm okay if they want to be a bouncer at a bar at night, but I don't think they should be test driving, drones and surveillance tools. Like that's not okay, right? I also think that spouses of the Supreme Court should shut up, but whatever. I just want to put that out there.
Yeah. That's what Clearview AI was doing too, right? They were giving it away free to the police departments.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to go back to Debbie mentioning the constitutional amendment, because what I see and a lot of the butting heads, law school friends, like even like just academically, like religiously neutral, just academic people debating this, a lot of people will bring out that, hey, that court, the Supreme Court wasn't the right place. The argument against what we're saying is that Supreme Court wasn't the right place for this to come out. It should have been codified. It should be an amendment. Everything we're saying is the way, and Debbie, that's why I like that you're going there, is because we see that that's the way that you can't fight it as much. If we could get it to that point, that would be the strongest foothold. But even if we say tried to do something like the federal privacy law, kind of creating that before the constitutional amendment came, what's the likelihood? Okay, I keep this on my screen and it says mythical creatures, U.S. federal national privacy laws. From IAPP, like this is what we all know. We've been talking about this since as long as I've been in cyber and privacy, for and probably way before that. What's the likelihood that we're going to actually see that kind of change when we see and acknowledge everything we just said that's against that?
I think we have a better shot now than we did before this decision, because I think as things unfurl, people are going to start to see their rights being curtailed, right? Just give you an example. Let's say someone is pro-life, okay? And they're having IVF, they're trying to conceive or something. And they have a miscarriage. Who's to say that they aren't going to be charged legally? Because you can't really tell the difference between a miscarriage and anything else, right? So, you're going to have a situation where women in general are going to be surveilled, whether they are of childbearing age or not. You're going to see a lot of insurance companies raise premiums for women, not men. As a result of this, you're going to see a lot of health providers, move out of the women's health space because they won't be able to either get malpractice insurance or they think the risk is too high. So this is catastrophic, and I think as things go forward, in the months and weeks ahead, people are going to start to see how unfurling a decision that's been in place for over 50 years has its tentacles and paws and a lot of different things people aren't really expecting. So I think it's going to be a lot of unintended consequences, unfortunately, that will harm people. But I think I'm encouraged now that I'm hearing people really want to know for sure, okay, what's private and what's not? Like, what rights do I have? What, I thought I had all these rights, now I know that I don't. I'm hearing people, I'm talking to a lot of reporters and clients as well. They're like, so what do we do? Because it's not like going back 50 years. We've basically entered uncharted territory at this point. So, employers don't know what they should do. They want to support people. They aren't going to break the law, whatever the law is, to help people. And a lot of that is commerce again. So I think trying to go at it from a fundamental human right perspective, I think that's like a great foundation to be able to go for. And I'm hoping, even though I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to fight for privacy on a commerce level, it just doesn't cover all the bases. So I think we need to really be fighting for kind of more fundamental human right things.
Well, the UDHR has privacy as a human right. I think honestly we need more doxing of gun owners. I think that's helping bring the privacy to the forefront in a bipartisan way. Yeah, I really do, because they don't want that information out there. And so I think that it's enlightening for everyone. I think privacy in America needs to evolve to a point to where we see it as an individual right, like the GDPR. Those are my rights, I own them. Not an obligation we have on business through commerce. That's the wrong way to go about this issue. We've been going about it that way. It's a cluster. let's try something else. Let's go about it as a human right. Let's lay the foundation, and then we can adjust commerce from that. From what I've seen in working with clients, when I implement a privacy program, I'm then able to monetize their data within the privacy ecosystem and increase their revenue. So in some of them, I've opened new streams, new verticals of revenue they never even considered before by implementing a solid privacy cycle. So now I'm going back to them and saying, let's recategorize some of your data because we need to make a lot more of it sensitive just because. But that's just in the short run, something that we can do for businesses to let them know, here's how you can help people. The law is the floor, not the ceiling. You can always do more to help protect your people. If it's running up against getting in trouble, then you're gonna need legal counsel to advise you what the risks are and how much you wanna help. But there are companies out there like Patagonia that said, I will sue to protect my people. I will pay to challenge this in court. So companies are stepping up in some way to do something about it, but I think it goes back to privacy needs to be seen as an individual right instead of a business obligation.
Yeah, and simultaneously, I think what we need to do, we need to find a sexier term. Because I think for most people, the term privacy is kind of associated with me checking a box before I enter into you.
You know, like
Yeah.
we have like the pink hair privacy nerds. Like we're not like we're not a corporate buttoned up group of professionals.
Yeah, so that's a call to action. We need to start testing some hashtags and some more charged language. I like the whole idea of toxic data on one hand, on the negative side. I think that's a good point. And I kind of use that on a daily basis from the perspective of doing due diligence on new solutions. I always take the default position that if, when, where you can avoid actually creating any kind of personal identifiable data with your application, you should do so for your own interest perspective. And then there specifically, as we are now finally moving into a world of actually creating the World Wide Web, because what we're using right now is the commercial web, right? You're not on the web when you're using Google, Facebook, or any of your applications online. That's also an important distinction to be made, to tell people you're a non-player character if you're using these applications. You're being directed, you're being controlled based on whatever overriding objective, usually increasing of shareholder value, the application that you're engaging with has. You're not on the web. We need to ask to create the web, which is a matter of liberty, right? Which is a matter of self-determination, which is a matter of actually owning all your digital dust and also have the right to that dust not even being created or not leaving your house. So the other day when we had this discussion, I offered up this metaphor that I think might be more useful in terms of if you're going to a public mall and it has all those different stores in the mall and you're just buying some ice cream, then you don't expect that this ice cream vendor then will share all your personal identifiable data with everybody else in the mall and maybe more, and from now on follow you around to detect whenever you want to buy a new ice cream or maybe something that's associated to that behavior. So you don't expect that, and I think we should have that same expectation when we engage with any type of online services. It doesn't matter if it's healthcare or a buying preference, right? So, I mean, best case, quote unquote, it's just wasting your time by kind of directing your eyeballs and your attention, and then worst case, you're gonna experience negative consequences in form of whatever it is, healthcare being increased for you, and or some neighbor deciding that you're not worth participating in society anymore because he, she disagrees with whatever choices you make that are now all of a sudden public.
Debbie, I thought it was really interesting when you were talking about the prices of health insurance changing, male versus female and all of those things. And my husband's an attorney too, and don't hold it against us, but we live in Texas. And he was saying, because property values are going to change. He's like, there's going to be so many people that are going to leave Texas or leave these certain states or come. This is going to have such huge ripple effects that, Debbie's just widening my brain on all the things that could be impacted by this. But I think, Chris, it's about those things that people care about changing, not just like the data people gloss out. That's what I feel like we have to get beyond the data. If we start saying data, we have to actually say some of these rights that you're talking about and that Heidi is talking about and Debbie and Chris, you were alluding to. You almost have to get to like the hot the hot button issues, because the data is when people glaze over.
Yeah, well, there's also a lot of technical ignorance here. So the current state that we created is largely based on technology debt. So what I mean by that, the fact that we're using database solutions and those are maintained by third parties that get then complete control over databases and your personal identifiable data is an externality of legacy technology, so specifically legacy database solutions that we then attached to network technologies. That was never a good idea. And so we're in the process of fixing that, but it's entirely fixable. And ironically, people keep focusing on things that are not as important, like cryptocurrencies. But the principle that specifically the Bitcoin white paper introduced is basically that you now can control and own and have property rights to your bytes. And that's an important message that we haven't gotten out yet, because people keep talking about things that don't matter, like jumping jiffies and cryptocurrencies. What matters is that these bytes, whatever they represent, right, they belong to you. They are yours. You should be controlling them. And that's why we chose the title for our discussion as Your Rights, Your Bytes, Your Bytes, Your Rights. And I always get it wrong. But anywho, so the larger point there being is, I think we should adopt this default position of, if I create digital dust, it's mine. And if you want it, then you gotta ask me nicely about that and prove that I consented to that, because by default I own that, right? So that is my default position. And specifically, if, when, where it touches quote-unquote public networks like the World Wide Web and Internet, because that by its pure nature you should consider as a public commons with all the rights and privileges that you enjoy as a human being, as in no one else gets to streamline that and gets to censor it and direct you. It's like the metaphor I use for that. You don't expect your car to take you where the car manufacturer wants you to go, right? And so we shouldn't expect that technologies that we're using take over human agency. This is what that really is, even though that's also not a sexy term. Again, still looking for a sexy term.
Well, I'm looking to start a political action committee, and I'm thinking about calling it "No, You Calm Down." Right? No? Right? Or maybe,
I like it.
right? 28th Amendment, privacy, political action committee.
why not?
I'm in
Why not?
DC. I've got to start raising money. I got to start making noise. It's going to take about 18 months to get this thing done, which leads into the next election. So whatever happens at the midterm, I'm not concerned, because there is bipartisan support for this. Everybody wants privacy now that they know what it means. So I'm going to keep doing this. So if you find other people that are as crazy as I am about wanting to do this, let me know. It's going to resolve our issues. It'll give us the foundational rights in our dust, right? Yeah, it'll give us the power and agency to say, no, you can't use this data against me when I'm applying for a job or a housing or any of those, highly suspect areas. So yeah, algorithmic bias is a problem, and it's because they have access to private information. How do we stop that? We need rights in our data. So I think it is a constitutional amendment. Everything else is going to be icing on top of that, but I think foundationally we got to start with that. RBG said that Roe should have been decided on the 14th Amendment, and she said that it was wrongly decided, which is why it didn't have a proper foundation. She had a case that was coming before the Supreme Court before she was named to the Supreme Court. And this case involved a woman who got pregnant in the military and was forced to have an abortion, because the military procedure at the time was still forced them to have an abortion. And she fought the right to have her child and have her child. So the court said the issue was moot. We're not taking cases for that, and they changed their policy in the military. So then that case didn't go. But that would have been the one that decided it, to say equal protection of the law, and now we have a foundational right, and that would have done more to establish privacy. It would have had a stronger foothold. And she always said that, and I'm glad she didn't live to see this, but the work isn't over. It's just getting more complicated now. So I'm glad that we're talking about it. Thanks for giving us a venue to talk about this.
Yeah. I don't think we know how to talk about this issue, about privacy, about data privacy. I think you've all mentioned this, but it is true that we have bipartisan support for whatever this is, right? for data privacy, for our right to privacy. And consumer sentiment, even if people don't understand the risk, if they don't understand the technology, if they don't understand data privacy, consumer sentiment is already there, even if they don't understand what exactly that is. There's a new study by Catch, a data privacy company, that says that 82% of people they surveyed were very concerned about the data that was gathered and how it was used, their personal data. And they also said that data privacy was the top priority of 74% of US consumers, right? More important to those consumers than other ethical values like sustainability or diversity and inclusion. That's really crazy, right? They're more concerned about data privacy, their privacy, than...
We would have more diversity if we have more rights in our data, because then they wouldn't be able to discriminate against folks.
Well, yeah, right? I mean, it's just interesting numbers, right? But the fact that we can't even talk about it clearly, right? That we don't even really understand it, that we don't even really know how to describe it, and yet still there's a consensus, a very strong consensus. That's important, right? This is a groundswell. People want a right to privacy, and they understand that they're being taken advantage of, that their data is being taken from them.
All right, so I'm going to go with no, you calm down for the political meeting. All right, it's agreed. Thanks.
Well,
Do we have people listening? Are people listening?
yes. Yeah, so to people in the audience, if you have a question, raise your hand virtually, and I'll move you to our panelist stage if you want to do that. Otherwise, we are 3 minutes to the top of the hour. I don't see anybody. So yeah, maybe then kind of in closing, so my approach for some time now has obviously been to empower those people that can make technology decisions that have far-reaching influence over what actually can be done ultimately, right? So what can be discovered. And to that extent that companies are still collecting information, I think we need to invalidate this business model and then ultimately also make an example out of those companies that still do that, right? Very aggressively go after them. I think there's a lot of companies and a lot of business models that should not be allowed to exist. Generally speaking, I'm against any type of advertising. That shouldn't be a business model, and if we allow that, we should tax the hell out of this, kind of like fast food.
I think we need things to make it not worth it to do.
Right, exactly.
Right now, it is too worth it. It's like taking candy from a baby, right? So
if we can, we do, right?
Yeah. Data that they can repurpose, reuse, resell to whoever. So that commerce part has to not be worth it. So
correct.
For me, for the BIPA law in Illinois, we've seen companies like Facebook say, as a result of us losing, $600 and some million, we're not gonna, capture face prints anymore, right? So that's the type of change that I need to see, right? And a lot of that, unfortunately, goes back to commerce. It has to not be worth it. It has to not be worth it. So if we can find ways, I'm not a fan of laws that try to take out things like private right of action, because unfortunately, people communicate in money. So let's talk to them in money.
Yeah. Well, I think we actually have all the laws that we ever need. We just don't have kind of the forensics and otherwise tools to do proper attribution of certain outcomes in the real world, right? So my typical example is that there's probably a child doing something entirely stupid right now based on information that this child has received on the internet and was kind of sucked down this particular channel where it created an echo chamber of information that made him or her believe that bleach is a good idea to cure yourself from COVID, right? So, and where we have those digital forensic tools to assign agency and attribution and culpability in these actions and these outcomes to companies that facilitating them, then we should hold them criminally accountable, right? So to me, selling social engineering as a service should not be a business model, because that's what these companies are selling. They're not selling advertising, right? That is just a lie, right? That's not what's happening, obviously.
Right. Well, that's why that human, that's what's lacking in that, right? It's like, it sucks to be you, and we don't really care because we're making money. So I think that human part is the gap that we need to fix, hopefully.
I think there's an education piece to this.
Yes.
I know we're right at the end of the hour, but when I did right after law school, public defender stuff, and what I realized in this process is not this polarizing good versus evil. It was a lack of communication of the process. There was a lack of understanding. And so when we say, like, we need education, it needs to be from every different level, because even if you have a pack and you educate the hell out of the privacy rights and issues, you have still people over here on Facebook or on whatever just throwing information on the wall because they don't realize and understand the impact of them displaying their life on, or bad things they do, ways they disobey the law, ways they criminalize, ways they break the rules, like that kind of stuff I think that Debbie, that's like the hardest, I don't know why I keep referring to Debbie, but any of you guys, that's the hardest to me thing to wrap my head around this, but how do you educate all of the users? Because yes, a lot of people can nerd out with us in this privacy stuff, but how do we break it down to take out the emotions and break it down to the rights that each individual should have? I think that's still a difficult hurdle as the education piece as well.
Well, I talk to people everywhere I go about privacy, whether they want to hear it or not. So, yeah, I do. I ask them 3 questions. What does privacy mean to you? Right? Because it's not secluding yourself. That's different. What does privacy mean to you? What do you think about data brokers? And do you know how to change the settings on your phone? It's usually an enlightening conversation every time, and I usually walk away with them angry at data brokers, and the device settings aren't all handled. So I'm trying, but I'm just one woman. So I think we need a larger, platform than talking to each other about what we think, because we all agree. So I don't know how to get the interest of other people to talk to them, but we can keep trying. So maybe I'll do it with my political action committee.
Let's fight the good fight.
Yeah, right. Thank you for this. It was good to see everybody.
That's good.
You're right, you put a fun group together.
Well, I want to thank our speakers, Heidi Sass, Colin Waukee, who had to leave us earlier, Violet Sullivan, Debbie Reynolds, and look forward to talking with you guys again at some point in a future episode. This has been Your Bites, Your Rights episode. Any last words, Chris? No?
Well, I was already playing our outro.
Alright,
so still working on this, but yeah, we'll get it perfect someday. All right, thank you everybody. Have a good weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.